The rain pounded against the glass windows, blurring the world outside into a mess of gray and gold under the dying sunset. Inside the vast but empty house, Samuel Carter knelt on the marble floor, clutching a small, crumpled photograph to his chest. His tailored suit, once pristine, was soaked through, the cufflinks loose and forgotten. Before him stood a boy no older than 8, trembling in his oversized jacket, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Samuel's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he stared into the boy's face, a mirror of his own. Every line, every curve of that face, echoed his own childhood portraits, the ones his late wife once framed lovingly by the bed. Samuel had built empires, torn down rivals, and survived betrayal, but nothing had prepared him for this. He reached out a shaking hand, brushing the boy's rain-dampened hair aside, revealing a scar above the eyebrow, a tiny, almost invisible mark, identical to the one Samuel bore. The housekeeper, the woman he had hired just weeks ago, stood frozen in the hallway, her hands covering her mouth, tears slipping silently down her face. Samuel turned his head slowly, disbelief clouding his features. "Is it true?" he rasped, his voice breaking under the weight of it. She nodded once, helplessly, unable to speak. In the boy's small hand was a necklace, a battered silver chain with a pendant that Samuel recognized instantly. It had been a gift, a long-ago promise made in a time Samuel had buried deep under years of ambition and regret. He had given it to a young woman before he ever dreamed of boardrooms and billions, a woman he had loved with reckless innocence, and lost without even knowing the truth she carried. The boy's lip quivered. "My mom, she told me to find you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm raging outside. Samuel's heart clenched painfully. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died on his tongue. How could he explain a lifetime of absence? How could he ask for forgiveness from a child he never knew existed? A flash of lightning lit up the room, casting their shadows in stark, raw relief on the polished floor. Samuel saw himself then, a man who had chased everything but the things that mattered most. His hands dropped to his sides, powerless. In the suffocating silence, the housekeeper finally stepped forward, her voice trembling as she broke the spell. "His name is Ethan," she said. "Ethan Carter." Samuel flinched at the sound of the name, as if it were a blade twisting in his ribs. Carter. His name. His blood. His son. The boy stared up at him with a blend of hope and terror, waiting for judgment, waiting for acceptance, waiting for anything. Samuel sank back onto his heels, exhausted, overwhelmed, lost. "I didn't know," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice cracked, carrying all the weight of missed birthdays, of untold bedtime stories, of laughter that never reached these halls. The boy inched closer, uncertain. Samuel hesitated, then opened his arms, awkwardly, desperately, as if he could pull back the years with a single embrace. Ethan rushed into them without hesitation, burying his face against Samuel's chest, his small body shaking with silent sobs. Samuel clutched him tightly, closing his eyes against the flood of tears that blurred the world once again. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to break, to mourn, to love, to hope. The housekeeper, no, not just a housekeeper, but the last tether to the life he should have had, turned away, giving them a fragile moment of privacy. Somewhere deep inside Samuel, a vow began to form, a vow stronger than any contract he had ever signed. He would not lose his son again. Not to pride, not to fear, not to the relentless march of time. The storm outside began to subside, the thunder fading into a distant grumble. Samuel pulled back just enough to look into Ethan's eyes, those eyes that held both accusation and forgiveness. He brushed a thumb over the boy's cheek, as if memorizing the feel of him, anchoring himself to this fragile new beginning. "I'm here," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "I'm not going anywhere." And with those words, the empire he had built on ambition crumbled, replaced by something far more precious, far more enduring. Love, raw and imperfect. A second chance he never deserved, yet was willing to fight for with everything he had left. But to understand how they arrived at this impossible reunion, how a lost son found his way back to a father who never knew he needed saving, we have to turn back the clock. To the choices made in youth, the paths taken in ignorance, and the moments of connection that almost slipped away forever. The rain had not yet begun to fall on that distant afternoon years ago, when Samuel Carter was still just a boy with sharp dreams and a reckless heart. The world then was warm, bathed in the golden haze of late summer, and Samuel, with sleeves rolled up and tie askew, had only one concern in the world: winning the approval of a father who measured affection in accomplishments. Love was a currency Samuel had never been taught to spend freely, only to earn with sweat and ambition. His days were packed with meetings he barely understood, his nights with silent dinners at long tables where words dissolved into clinks of silverware. In that lonely rhythm, he found solace in the arms of the one person who saw him not as an heir or a future tycoon, but simply as a man. Her name was Elena. She was light incarnate, a whirlwind of laughter, paint-stained fingers, and spontaneous poetry read aloud under the stars. She had grown up in the quiet side streets of the city, in a world where dreams had to fit inside modest walls but still found a way to breathe. Samuel met her by accident, or perhaps by destiny, when his car broke down near a small community fair. She had been selling handmade jewelry, each piece a tiny story spun in silver and glass. He had been cold and aloof at first, but Elena's disarming smile shattered his carefully built walls. A spilled cup of lemonade, a shared laugh over a crooked necklace clasp, and somehow he had found himself staying longer than he should have, talking about nothing and everything under strings of fairy lights. For the first time, Samuel had tasted a life that wasn't measured in contracts and quarterly reports. Weeks turned into months. Their worlds could not have been more different, but in secret meetings stolen between boardrooms and gallery openings, they created a world that belonged only to them. She taught him how to dance barefoot in the rain, he taught her how to play chess under the heavy silence of midnight. They promised nothing but today, aware in some quiet corner of their hearts that the world beyond their bubble would never understand. One evening, under a fading autumn sky, Samuel gave Elena a silver pendant, an unassuming piece of jewelry, a simple token of a love he dared not name aloud. A reminder, he said gruffly, sliding it into her palm, that no matter what happens, someone out there carries you with him. But dreams are fragile things in a world that demands conformity. Samuel's father, cold and calculating, discovered the relationship through whispered gossip and hired surveillance. The confrontation had been brutal. "You are a Carter," his father had spat, slamming a fist against the polished desk. "You will not throw away everything for some street artist." There had been threats, ultimatums, and at last, a choice Samuel had not been ready to make. Crushed under the weight of expectation and fear, he allowed himself to be shipped overseas for a mandatory business expansion project, without even a proper goodbye. Elena had waited for him under the oak tree by the river, clutching the pendant, watching as the last train pulled away without him. He told himself it was for the best. That she would move on. That love was a luxury he could not afford. Buried in boardrooms and mergers, he hardened his heart and told himself it had been a foolish boy's infatuation. Weeks turned into years, and with time, the memories dulled, or so he believed. What he never knew was that Elena had discovered she was pregnant days after he left. Terrified, alone, and determined not to trap Samuel into a life he did not choose, she had made the impossible decision to keep the secret. She raised their son in the quiet margins of the city, working 3 jobs, shielding the boy from the cruel judgment of a world that prized wealth above love. Elena's life was a tapestry of sacrifice. She stitched together scraps of happiness where she could, birthday cakes made from boxed mix, second-hand bicycles, nighttime lullabies sung off-key but full of love. She told Ethan stories about a brave, kind man who had to go away but who would have loved him fiercely if fate had been kinder. And when she fell ill, when her body began to fail under the relentless march of time and exhaustion, she entrusted Ethan with a single mission: to find his father. To find Samuel Carter. The pendant was passed down, its chain repaired a dozen times, the silver dulled but the memory burning bright. On her final night, with the rain tapping gently against the cracked window, Elena pressed the necklace into Ethan's small hand and whispered, "He didn't abandon you. He just never knew. Find him, my love. Not for answers, but for yourself." Ethan, with the fierce courage inherited from both parents, set out into a world he barely understood, armed only with a name, a pendant, and the unshakable belief that somewhere out there was a man who would recognize him, who would claim him. Meanwhile, Samuel's life unfolded with the cold efficiency expected of him. He built towers of glass and steel, amassed fortunes, received accolades. But no amount of success could quiet the ghost that sometimes stirred late at night, the memory of laughter under fairy lights, the phantom brush of fingers against his own. In quieter moments, when champagne glasses clinked and hollow congratulations filled the air, Samuel would find himself searching the crowd for a face he knew he would never see again. Love had been relegated to the background noise of his empire. He convinced himself he was content. Until a crumpled application for a housekeeping position crossed his desk one day, bearing a name he did not recognize, but a handwriting, slanted, hopeful, oddly familiar, that tugged at something deep within him. A housekeeper, he thought absently. For his increasingly vacant mansion. Another meaningless hire. Another soul passing through the revolving door of his curated loneliness. He approved the application without a second thought. The universe, however, had very different plans. The boy appeared first, trailing after the housekeeper like a cautious shadow. Samuel noticed him in passing, a mop of dark hair, eyes too big for his small face, but thought little of it. Until one evening, when forgotten files, a missed dinner, and the sound of laughter in the kitchen drew him from his sterile office. He watched, unseen, as the boy spun clumsily across the tile floor, the pendant glinting against his chest. The world tilted. The breath left Samuel's lungs in a single, jagged exhale. He stumbled back, memories slamming into him with merciless force. The pendant. The silver chain. Elena's laughter. The boy noticed him then, halting mid-spin. They stared at each other across the chasm of lost years. And in that fragile, suspended moment, Samuel Carter, the CEO, the conqueror, the man who had thought himself immune to love, felt the walls of his carefully constructed world begin to crack, just as the first heavy raindrops began to drum against the windows. Because some truths, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of finding their way home. The rain washed away the final layers of Samuel's defenses as he stood rooted to the floor, staring at the boy. Every instinct told him to act, to speak, to explain, but the words felt clumsy and unworthy. Instead, he followed the boy's retreating figure with haunted eyes as the housekeeper, Margaret, gently ushered him away, leaving Samuel alone with his unraveling thoughts. The days that followed blurred into one another. Samuel moved through them like a ghost haunting his own life, unable to focus, unable to breathe. Meetings were missed, emails ignored, and the ever-persistent buzz of his phone went unanswered. His empire could crumble for all he cared. For the first time in decades, Samuel Carter was consumed by something far greater than ambition, the desperate need for connection. Late at night, he wandered the empty halls of his home, listening to the distant, muffled laughter of Ethan and Margaret from the kitchen. He would pause outside the door, heart pounding, aching to join them but paralyzed by fear that he was too late, that he didn't deserve a place in the boy's life. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, Samuel found himself sitting on the staircase, head in his hands. Footsteps approached hesitantly, and when he looked up, Ethan stood there, clutching a worn teddy bear under one arm, the pendant still glinting at his chest. "Are you sad?" Ethan asked quietly, his small face etched with concern. Samuel swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "A little," he admitted. The boy hesitated, then climbed the steps and sat beside him, their shoulders barely touching. For a long time, they said nothing, the simple act of proximity speaking louder than words. Samuel fought the urge to pull Ethan into his arms, to apologize for all the years lost, but he knew instinctively, that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. My mom used to sit with me like this when I felt lonely, Ethan said, swinging his legs idly. She said sometimes you don't have to talk. You just have to be there. Samuel's throat tightened painfully. He turned his head, studying the boy's profile, the stubborn set of his chin, the soft curve of his cheek, so achingly familiar it hurt. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, battered photo, the only one he had of Elena, taken on a long-forgotten afternoon by the river. She was very special, Samuel said hoarsely, holding the photo out. Ethan took it reverently, his fingers tracing the faded image. She told me about you, he whispered. She said you were brave. Samuel laughed then, a broken, bitter sound. She gave me too much credit. Ethan looked up at him, serious beyond his years. She said even brave people get scared sometimes. Tears blurred Samuel's vision. He reached out, almost afraid Ethan would flinch away, but the boy leaned into the touch, resting his small hand on Samuel's larger one. I'm not going anywhere, Samuel said again, more to himself than to Ethan. Days stretched into weeks, and slowly, painstakingly, Samuel wove himself into the boy's life. He attended school plays, learned the names of Ethan's favorite superheroes, burned pancakes on Saturday mornings, and sat through endless games of chess, each move a silent conversation between two hearts learning to trust. Margaret watched from the sidelines with a bittersweet smile. She had known Elena, had promised her she would look after Ethan should anything happen. It had been Margaret who taught Ethan how to read, who held him during nights filled with fever and nightmares. But now she stepped back, allowing the boy to forge a bond with the father he had never known. Samuel changed too. The ruthless executive who once closed multi-million-dollar deals without blinking now celebrated spelling bee victories like world championships. He canceled business trips to attend parent-teacher conferences. His colleagues murmured behind closed doors about his decline, but Samuel no longer cared. For the first time in his life, he was building something that could not be bought or sold, a family. Yet the past, stubborn and unyielding, refused to stay buried. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, Samuel stumbled upon a stack of letters, all addressed to him in a hand he would have recognized anywhere. Letters from Elena, never sent, each one a desperate attempt to bridge the widening gulf between them. Some were angry, others filled with longing, all of them soaked in the kind of raw, unfiltered love Samuel had spent a lifetime denying himself. He sat on the dusty floor, reading them one by one, tears streaming down his face. In those letters, Elena told him about Ethan's first steps, his first word, his first scraped knee. She confessed her fears, her hopes, her undying belief that Samuel, if he ever found them, would be the father Ethan deserved. Guilt clawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. He had been absent for all of it, the milestones, the heartbreaks, the simple, irreplaceable moments. And yet, against all odds, he had been given another chance. Downstairs, Ethan called out, his voice carrying through the halls. Samuel wiped his eyes, carefully gathered the letters, and descended the stairs. Ethan stood by the front door, his backpack slung over one shoulder, holding a crumpled flyer in his hand. There's a father-son camping trip at school, he said shyly. But it's okay if you're too busy. Samuel knelt down, brushing a hand over Ethan's hair. I'm never too busy for you. The boy's face lit up with a smile so pure it knocked the breath from Samuel's lungs. Later that night, as they packed sleeping bags and marshmallows into the trunk of the car, Samuel slipped the letters into a drawer in his study, a sacred reminder of the journey that had brought them here, to this fragile, precious beginning. As they drove into the fading twilight, Ethan chattered excitedly about tents and ghost stories, and Samuel listened, drinking in every word like a man starving. He had lost so much. But not this. Not anymore. Beside him, Ethan tugged at his sleeve. Hey, Dad. Samuel turned, the title still so new, so wondrous, that it felt like a prayer answered. Yeah, buddy. I'm glad I found you. Samuel swallowed hard, reaching over to squeeze Ethan's shoulder. "Me too, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." The stars began to prick the darkening sky, and the road stretched out before them, uncertain, unwritten, but theirs to travel together. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of rain and regret, Elena's spirit smiled, her love still threading them together, stronger than any sorrow, shining brighter than any storm. The woods were alive with the crackle of campfires and the laughter of children as Samuel and Ethan pitched their small, borrowed tent beneath a canopy of ancient trees. The stars spilled across the ink-black sky, 1,000 silent witnesses to the fragile bond being woven anew between father and son. Samuel fumbled awkwardly with the tent poles, eliciting a fit of giggles from Ethan, whose nimble fingers eventually guided them into place. They roasted marshmallows until they were golden and gooey, and Samuel listened as Ethan chattered about school, friends, and dreams of building a treehouse, way bigger than any CEO's office. Every word was a thread sewing Samuel back into the life he had so carelessly abandoned all those years ago. As the fire died down to glowing embers, Ethan crawled into his sleeping bag, his eyelids heavy with sleep. Samuel sat just outside the tent, staring into the dying fire, feeling the weight of the night settle into his bones. Memories, regrets, hopes, they all swirled around him, as restless and persistent as the night wind. "Dad," came a sleepy murmur from inside the tent. Samuel turned, his heart tightening at the sound. "Yeah, buddy. Will you still be here in the morning?" Samuel swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing a steady voice. "I'll always be here, Ethan. Always." The boy sighed contentedly and drifted into sleep, leaving Samuel alone with the stars. He tilted his head back, closing his eyes, and whispered a silent promise to the heavens, to Elena, to Ethan, to the man he had once wanted to become but never dared. Morning came with a soft drizzle and the smell of damp earth. They packed up their things and drove back to the city, the truck filled with the kind of comfortable silence that only grows between people who trust each other completely. Samuel watched Ethan from the corner of his eye, marveling at how easily the boy occupied his heart, how quickly love, once denied, could flood every broken corner of his soul. Back at the mansion, Samuel took a deep breath before unlocking a door he hadn't opened in years. It was a small room, tucked away from the grand halls and sterile boardrooms, Elena's room. Or rather, the room he had designed once upon a time for the life he had secretly wanted with her. It had remained untouched, a shrine to a dream deferred. Now, he knelt and began dusting off the old furniture, pulling white sheets from over forgotten memories. Ethan helped, eyes wide with curiosity. Together, they uncovered an old easel, a set of unopened watercolors, a battered copy of The Little Prince, and a music box that played a soft, broken lullaby. Samuel knelt beside the boy, placing a hand on his small shoulder. "Your mom," he said softly, "she was an artist. She saw beauty in everything, even when the world tried to take it away." Ethan traced a finger over the cracked paint on the easel. "Can we paint something for her?" Samuel smiled, his heart swelling with pride and sorrow. "Yeah, buddy. Let's do that." They spent the afternoon painting, messy, colorful strokes that filled the room with life and laughter. Samuel's suit jacket was soon splattered with blue and green, and Ethan's nose bore a proud streak of yellow. They painted a meadow, a tree with a tire swing, and a house with wide open windows where laughter lived and no one ever left. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the windows, Samuel hung their masterpiece on the wall. He stepped back, arm around Ethan, and felt a peace he hadn't known since boyhood. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Samuel rebuilt his life, not in boardrooms and balance sheets, but in bedtime stories, school runs, burnt pancakes, and shared secrets whispered under the covers. One crisp autumn morning, Samuel took Ethan to visit Elena's resting place for the first time. The cemetery was quiet, the trees ablaze with the colors of fall. Ethan carried a bouquet of wildflowers clutched tightly in his small hands, and Samuel carried a heart full of unspoken words. They knelt before the simple headstone, the letters weathered but still clear, Elena Maris. Beloved Mother. Unseen light. Ethan placed the flowers gently at the base of the stone. He traced the carved name with his fingers, lips moving in a silent prayer. Samuel crouched beside him, removing the pendant from around his neck, the same one he had given Elena so long ago, now repaired, its silver polished to a soft glow. He pressed it into the earth at the base of the headstone. "Thank you," Samuel whispered. "For everything." Ethan looked up at him, eyes shining. "She's not really gone, is she?" Samuel shook his head, blinking back tears. "No, buddy. She's here." He touched Ethan's chest, just above his heart. "She's always here." They sat in silence for a long time, the wind weaving through the trees, carrying with it the soft, sweet memory of a love too strong to die. Later, as they walked hand in hand back to the car, Samuel looked down at the boy beside him, the living, breathing proof that love endures beyond absence, beyond grief, beyond regret. He had built towers of steel and glass. But this boy, this bond, this messy, beautiful second chance, was the only legacy that mattered. Life did not miraculously become perfect. There were still hard days, moments of doubt, pangs of old guilt. But now, Samuel faced them with the steady weight of Ethan's hand in his and the memory of Elena's laughter in his heart. On the anniversary of Elena's passing, Samuel and Ethan hosted a small gathering in the mansion's sunlit atrium. They invited neighbors, friends, teachers, people who had become their new, patchwork family. They served Elena's favorite foods, told stories, played music, and filled the cold, empty house with life. Samuel stood at the edge of the room, watching as Ethan darted through the crowd, laughing, loved, alive. He felt a hand slip into his, Margaret's, offering silent solidarity. He squeezed it gently, then raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To lost things found," he said under his breath. "And to the ones who never really left us." That night, long after the last guest had departed and the house had fallen quiet again, Samuel tucked Ethan into bed. The boy clutched the music box they had found in Elena's room, the lullaby playing softly in the dark. "Dad?" Samuel brushed the hair from Ethan's forehead. "Yeah, buddy. Are we gonna be okay?" Samuel smiled, his chest aching with love so fierce it bordered on pain. "We already are." He turned off the lamp, leaving the door ajar. In the hallway, he paused, looking back one last time at the boy who had saved him from a lifetime of loneliness. The house no longer felt cold. It breathed with memories, with laughter, with hope. Samuel Carter had finally found his home. And this time, he was never letting go.